What if I told you there's a story in the Old Testament that's just as miraculous as Jesus feeding the 5,000? Imagine being a witness to a moment where a prophet of God multiplies food, saving his entire community from hunger. By the end of this video, you'll uncover powerful spiritual insights and discover why this miracle is still relevant to our faith journey today. As we dive in, I'd love for you to comment on your initial thoughts. Does the idea of miracles fascinate you, or do you sometimes feel skeptical? Let's spark a meaningful discussion below. To appreciate the full impact of this miracle, we need to understand the circumstances of 2 Kings for verses 40 to 44. At this point in Israel's history, the nation was in turmoil. Pagan influences were creeping into the land, and God's prophets were actively working to call the people back to faith. Elisha, the spiritual successor to Elijah, was at the forefront of this mission. Now, picture the setting. Elisha is with the sons of the prophets, a group of devoted followers learning under him. These were not just students, they were part of a spiritual movement. But just like in any other community, practical needs had to be met. They needed food, shelter, and sustenance. On this particular day, as hunger gripped the camp, a series of events unfolded that would remind them, and us, of God's never-ending provision. Let's zoom into verse 40. A well-meaning member of the group had gone out to gather herbs but, in his ignorance, picked wild goods that were actually poisonous. When the stew was served, panic broke out. Imagine the desperation and fear as they realized, "Man of God, there is death in the pot." It's hard not to feel the tension of that moment. Here's a question to think about. Have you ever faced a crisis that came out of nowhere, where your best intention somehow made things worse? Share your stories in the comments if you feel comfortable. This incident shows us the fragility of our own wisdom and how easily it can fail us. Despite our best efforts, sometimes we end up with death in the pot, problems that our human understanding cannot solve. Elisha, however, doesn't panic. Instead, he asks for flour. He throws it into the pot, and miraculously, the stew is purified. Now, this isn't just a random act. It's a demonstration of faith in God's power to heal and restore. The flour wasn't magical, it was a symbol of divine intervention. It's a reminder that when God steps in, even what was meant to harm us can be transformed into something good. Think about the times you've needed a miracle. How often do we forget that God can take even our biggest mistakes and make something beautiful out of them? This leads us to an important reflection. Do we invite God into our crises, or do we try to fix everything on our own first? Now, here's a thought-provoking question. Why did God allow the stew to be poisoned in the first place? Couldn't he have prevented that from happening? Some might argue it was a test of faith, a way to remind the sons of the prophets, and us, of our dependence on God. Others might see it as an example of how God brings good even out of potentially devastating situations. What do you think? Do you believe God allows challenges in our lives as tests or as opportunities for His power to be revealed? This is where faith becomes real, and I'd love to hear your perspective in the comments. Now, let's move to the miracle of the multiplied bread, starting in verse 42. A man comes to Elisha with an offering, 20 small loaves of barley bread. Keep in mind, this wasn't a grand feast. These loaves were more like rolls, barely enough for a handful of people, let alone the entire community. But Elisha confidently says, "Give it to the people to eat, for this is what the Lord says, they will eat and have some left over." It's here we see a foreshadowing of Jesus' miracle centuries later. Yet, it's also a lesson for today. God's promises often require us to act in faith, even when the resources seem laughably small. Pause for a moment and ask yourself, how do you respond when God asks you to step out in faith, even when the odds are stacked against you? Do you trust His provision, or do you doubt? Be honest with yourself, and if you're comfortable, share your struggles in the comments. Your story might inspire someone else. One of the most profound takeaways from this story is the nature of God's abundance. The bread didn't just feed everyone, there were leftovers. God doesn't just meet our needs, He often exceeds them. Yet, how often do we approach God with a scarcity mindset, doubting that He can truly provide? For spiritual growth, this miracle challenges us to rethink our faith. Are we limiting God by our expectations, or are we open to the possibility that He can do the impossible? It's easy to get caught up in what we don't have. But this story is a call to focus on what God can do with even our smallest offerings. Let's draw a parallel to the New Testament. When Jesus fed the 5,000, He took a boy's small lunch and multiplied it. The similarity is striking. It's almost as if God wanted to remind us, through two different prophets in two different eras, that He is the ultimate provider. Both miracles point to the same truth: God is never limited by what we see as not enough. Ask yourself, in what areas of your life do you feel like you don't have enough? Maybe it's finances, strength, or even hope. What would happen if you surrendered those and not enoughs to God? It's a challenge for all of us, but one worth considering. So, how can we apply these lessons today? First, we must remember that God's power often works through our obedience. Elisha didn't hesitate, he acted on God's promise. Likewise, we're called to act in faith, even when the odds seem against us. Secondly, we need to understand that God's provision isn't just physical. Yes, He provides food and resources, but He also offers spiritual nourishment. When we feel empty or depleted, God is the one who can multiply our inner strength and fill us with His peace. Lastly, consider the importance of gratitude. The man who brought the barley loaves could have easily thought, "What's the point? This won't make a difference." But he gave what he had, and God used it mightily. What small act of service or generosity is God calling you to today? Remember, it's not about the size of the offering, but the heart behind it. As we wrap up, I want you to take a moment to reflect. Where do you see yourself in this story? Are you like the sons of the prophets, desperate and in need of a miracle? Are you like the man who gave his loaves, offering what little he had? Or maybe you're in a season where God is asking you to trust Him for provision. Drop a comment and let me know where you are on your faith journey. Let's build a community where we can learn from and encourage each other. And if you found hope or insight in this story, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe for more biblical insights, and share this with someone who needs a reminder that God provides. Thank you for joining me as we explored this incredible Old Testament miracle. Remember, God's provision knows no bounds, and His power can transform even the most desperate situations. Until next time, keep your faith strong, and may God's abundance overflow in your life.